Margaret Hall had always been a woman of quiet strength. In her late 20s, she was a bright young artist living in the city, surrounded by friends who admired her wit and talent. Life felt limitless, until the night everything changed. She had been engaged to a man she deeply loved, a journalist named Daniel. They had dreams of traveling the world together, capturing its beauty in words and paintings. But one cold autumn evening, Daniel left their apartment to cover a breaking news story and never returned. He was caught in the crossfire of a violent robbery. His death was swift, senseless, and shattered Margaret's world. Grief consumed her. Friends and family tried to pull her back into life, but their voices became unbearable. Their well-meaning attempts to console her felt like noise, their presence a reminder of what she had lost. She withdrew, first from social gatherings, then from everyday interactions, until eventually, she retreated to a small cottage in rural Maine, convinced she needed solitude to heal. At first, the silence was a balm. She spent her days painting landscapes, capturing the wild, untamed beauty of the forests and ocean cliffs. She convinced herself that solitude was a choice, that she was embracing a life of peace rather than running from the world. Years passed. The phone calls from friends grew less frequent. Invitations stopped coming. The world moved on without her, and she told herself she preferred it that way. By the time Margaret reached her 60s, solitude was no longer a choice, it was simply her way of life. One chilly November evening, as the wind howled outside, Margaret sat in her dimly lit living room, staring at an old photograph of Daniel. The pain that she had buried deep for decades came crashing down with unbearable force. Her breath hitched as the weight of her choices pressed against her chest. Tears spilled over, hot and relentless. She sobbed into her hands, her body trembling with years of unexpressed grief. The silence of the house seemed to mock her, amplifying the loneliness she had refused to acknowledge. She rocked slightly, whispering apologies to the ghosts of her past, to Daniel, to her mother, to the friends she had left behind. The walls of her self-imposed prison suddenly felt suffocating. The solitude that once felt like protection was now a cruel punishment. As she wept, memories surfaced, vivid and piercing. One, in particular, seized her heart, a night with Daniel, just days before the tragedy. They had been lying on the floor of their tiny apartment, surrounded by half-packed bags and open sketchbooks. The glow of a single lamp cast warm shadows across their faces.
"Promise me something,"
Daniel murmured, tracing lazy circles on her wrist. Margaret smiled, turning toward him.
"Anything."
No matter what happens in life, you won't close yourself off from the world.
He held her gaze, his expression suddenly serious.
Even if things get hard. Even if.
He hesitated, shaking his head as if banishing the thought.
Just promise me you'll keep living, Margaret.
You sound like you're saying goodbye.
I'm not. I just know how much you feel things. And I don't ever want you to let that beautiful heart of yours go numb.
Tears burned behind her eyes as she stared at his face, forever frozen in time. How cruel that his words had come back to haunt her. She had broken that promise. She had let the world fade into silence, let her heart become cold and distant. She walked to the old wooden cabinet where she kept a box of letters, letters she had never sent. Letters to the friends she had pushed away. To her mother, who had passed years ago, still waiting for Margaret to come home. To Daniel, whose absence was the only constant presence in her life. She traced her fingers over the edges of a yellowed envelope, then hesitated. Outside, a car pulled into her long driveway, crunching the gravel. It was rare for her to have visitors. Her heart pounded as she peered through the window. A woman stepped out of the car. She was tall, with sharp, familiar features. Margaret gasped softly, pressing a hand to her mouth. It was Claire. Claire had been her best friend before the isolation began. They had spent their 20s together, inseparable, until Margaret had disappeared from her life. The last time they had spoken was years ago. Claire had called, begging her to come home for a reunion, and Margaret had refused. Now, here she was, standing at Margaret's door, after all this time. For a moment, Margaret considered not answering. She had spent so long shutting the world out. What was one more closed door? But something inside her, something long buried, urged her forward. She opened the door slowly.
Claire?
She breathed. Claire's face softened, and for a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Then, Claire stepped forward and pulled Margaret into a tight embrace.
You stubborn woman. You've been alone for too long.
Claire whispered, her voice trembling. Margaret felt something crack inside her. A sob rose in her throat, unexpected and raw. She clutched Claire's coat, unable to hold back the years of unspoken loneliness. They sat by the fire, drinking tea, speaking in hesitant sentences at first, then in a rush of memories. Claire told her about the friends Margaret had left behind, about the lives they had built. Some were married, and some had moved away. Some had tried for years to reach her before finally giving up.
I didn't want to be a burden.
Margaret admitted, staring into her cup.
I thought it was better this way.
Claire shook her head.
You were never a burden. We just wanted you to let us in.
Silence stretched between them, heavy with regret. Margaret looked around her house, at the paintings lining the walls, at the solitude she had once embraced. And for the first time, she wondered if she had mistaken survival for living. She reached for Claire's hand, squeezing it tightly. Maybe it's not too late. Claire smiled through her tears. It never was. The next morning, Margaret packed a small suitcase. For the first time in decades, she was leaving her sanctuary. Not forever, perhaps, but long enough to rediscover the world she had abandoned. As she locked the door behind her, she felt something shift inside, a quiet hope, blooming in the space where loneliness had once lived. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe for more. Thank you for your support.